Hey, I'm Chris Scott, founder of Fit Recovery. I just want to make a short video here about how to conquer worry. And worry is something that I've had a lot of experience with, not as much recently because I've largely overcome it, but I remember after I finally quit drinking years ago, I worried about everything from trivial things, from mail that I would let pile up because I was afraid it was going to be something threatening or a collection agency or bills I couldn't pay, to serious things like my ability to fit into society as a non-drinker or losing my parents before I could turn my life around. So I worried about stupid things and dark things at the same time, and I found that you need different strategies depending on what you're dealing with. So as far as events that are within our circle of control or things that we can influence, the best strategy by far that I've found is to simply stop procrastinating, and that takes an act of willpower. As insignificant as it sounds, I actually remember the first time I opened up all of the mail that had accumulated for weeks and decided to just pay bills and call collection agencies and deal with all of that crap that had been weighing me down. And I felt a huge amount of relief after I dealt with all of that. And it sounds silly now, but after I quit drinking, I wasn't exactly mentally there. And so it took me a while to just get back into the groove of being a member of society. It took me longer to become a productive member of society, but to just be a functioning member of society. So I find being proactive is the best strategy. If you can control something or influence it, just take action. You always feel better after you take action. If you can't control the object of your worry, I found that the best strategy is to try to crowd it out. So fill your time with things that prevent you from focusing on this thing that you can't control. And since you can't control it, it's a waste of time. There's no sense in worrying about it. Easier said than done, but that's why the only solution is to do other things. And so I definitely used the gym for this purpose. I was worried about returning to alcohol, rekindling my alcohol addiction after I quit, and I would just hit heavy weights every single night. I had a great group of guys who were more like acquaintances. I mean, they were friends, but not close friends, but they became close friends after we started going to the gym, after I quit drinking. And I realized how much I was missing out by just wasting my evenings on my couch with a bottle of wine or vodka or whatever. And so definitely crowding things out for things that are beyond your control that you shouldn't be wasting your life worrying about. I was listening to a YouTube video of Jim Rohn, who I believe is Tony Robbins' mentor, recently, and he gave the story of a family that goes on the best vacation ever, but the entire time they are worried sick about the possibility of getting into a tragic accident, freak accident, and dying. And so they don't enjoy their vacation at all. He said that story is a lot sadder when you realize that that's the way a lot of people live their lives. And so I think it's true. As much as easy as it is to say, don't live your life worrying about things you can't control, it's much harder to do it. But I think that's a good anecdote to keep in mind because it is really just a waste of time if you can't take action and get rid of the problem. Another strategy I like is to figure out what the worst outcome could possibly be for whatever I'm worrying about, and then imagine how I would deal with it. And most of the time, the worst outcome is not me dying, so I can figure something out. And if it is me dying, then I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to crowd it out because I can't do anything about that except avoid that outcome. And usually I can, almost always, I can avoid the outcome of me dying. And if I can't, I'm not going to worry about it. But if the outcome is something like in early recovery, I worried about rekindling my alcohol addiction. It's like, well, all right, what would I do? Would it be the end of the world? Would the skies turn black and I'd be struck down by lightning? No. I would tweak my strategies, figure out what went wrong, and get back on track. I think that kind of mentality can be really good. whatever happens, your toes are still tapping and you can get back on track. If you screw up, it's not the end of the world. So again, all of these things are easier said than done, but keeping them in mind can help you out. A strategy that I like if I'm worried about options or decisions, if I have a hard decision to make, I'll sometimes make a chart. I had a job choice or career choice to make after I quit finance. I was really without a job for a few months after I quit drinking, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I could try to go back into finance, or I could do something I really liked doing, which was work in a tiny gym and make no money. So I go back into finance and make way more money, but hate my life. Or I could work in a tiny gym and love my day-to-day life, but make very little money. So I ultimately decided to go the gym route, and I'm glad, because I can't imagine how my life would be now if I was still stuck doing something I don't love. And I did that because I made a decision chart. So I had the gym at the top and go back into finance right next to it. And on the left side, I had a column with all the criteria that mattered to me when choosing a career. So things like money, day-to-day satisfaction, happiness in 10 years doing this career, things like that. And I gave each criteria a number out of 10 for either the gym or go back to finance. And ultimately the gym won by, I think I had 6 or 7 different criteria, which isn't that many. The gym won by like 10 points. So I actually never looked back on it. And I think had I not made a decision chart and tried to analyze the issue logically, I probably would have second guessed myself for a long time. But because I made that chart and I thought of all the variables I could, I never thought twice about that, even when I was making so little money that I was legitimately frustrated. I thought, I made the right choice. I've analyzed this. What can I do now to do better? And so I found that was very helpful for me. If you're worried about just day-to-day things, worrying about forgetting things, that used to be big for me. It took a while for my mental clarity to return after I quit drinking. I can't recommend these 2 programs enough, one of which is really common, but Evernote is a program that I use to keep track of all my random thoughts. And I have a lot of random thoughts throughout the day. This video was actually a random thought that I had when I was going for a jog. And so I opened up my phone, went to Evernote, and recorded that thought. And so it automatically syncs to my computer. I keep track of all of my articles and anything that I need to do, emails that are important, they're all saved in Evernote. And Google Calendar is another great one. So you'll never really forget, assuming you have a smartphone and a Gmail account, you'll never forget things. It gives you 30-minute prior notifications for anything that's important. For me, it's anything from a important private coaching phone call to a meeting with a friend or a workout with a workout buddy. The 6th strategy here that I found to be useful for halting my worry process is to simply dissociate from my monkey brain. We can dissociate from mental processes. There's a really good book called You Are Not Your Brain by a few, I think, neuroscientists, doctors. It's written by a few people. But their point is that we can reframe and relabel processes that go on in our brains that we used to think we couldn't control at all. And they use the example of people with obsessive compulsive disorder actually using their minds to rewire their brain by labeling the obsessive process as something that was unproductive and not worthwhile, and coming up with alternatives. And so in this case, I think if we can understand that we have worry-prone brains, we evolved with these monkey brains that served us very well when the threats were saber-toothed tigers and crazy flying birds that ate people. Now the threats are things like urgent meetings or angry text messages or angry bosses. And so we don't, it's not necessary to have these exacerbated responses to stress that we have. Now, once again, easier said than done, but I think if we can relabel that mental process as something that we're all afflicted with, because we all have, I'd say, too much stress in modern society. It's probably why we're seeing a resurgence, or at least a huge popularity boost in things like yoga and meditation, even nap rooms. I've heard of some places where people go and they turn in their phones and they just take a nap, and then 30 minutes later they get woken up and they go about their day. But we all have these worry-prone brains, so we evolved that way. Our brains are constantly looking for threats. And so if we can tone down that process then and realize that that's what's going on, often it's a relief. And B, we can do something about it. We can dissociate, we can crowd out the worry, we can be proactive, and we can look at the worst possible outcome, make a decision chart, or we can use technology to help us deal with our worries instead of being stressful, which technology can certainly be. I have an article about reducing stress by eliminating cyber stress, not checking, no breaking news, no emails, and if you want to be extreme, no text messages till 5 p.m. and no social media for sure. I try to minimize that, absolutely. So those are my main strategies for reducing worry. I found them to be very helpful. I do talk a lot about biochemistry on my website, Fit Recovery, and it is super important to be biochemically stable. None of these strategies are going to work if you have, let's say, a severe serotonin deficiency, or you have an endorphin deficiency, or your dopamine levels are low. I'd say exercise, diet, lifestyle, sleeping, all of these things are super important to optimize before you start using the more mental strategies. But I wanted to mention one thing. This book, which is called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie, I think it was written in 1944. That is where I got the ideas, the strategies that I shared with you. Now, some of them aren't identical, but I derived them from his basic ideas, and it's a really fun book, in part because it's so old, and so the examples are kind of historically interesting at this point. People in World War II wondering if they're going to be tortured by the Japanese the next day. Whole bunch of stories, and he was a very good writer. But I would read about a chapter to 2 chapters of this book every night for several months after I quit drinking, and I found that it really helped me a lot. So I can't recommend that enough. And I do have more strategies for dealing with transcending alcohol on a mental level and dealing with stress, dealing with worry in my online course, Total Alcohol Recovery 2.0. So check it out. And that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give me a thumbs up and feel free to subscribe for more.